Hi, everybody in first, second, third, and fourth grade, and welcome to another Wednesday computer and technology class. So, for today, you have to first go to Google Classroom, and in Google Classroom, you'll see a post with instructions, and it has this exact document attached. Now, this document is basically what we should have made for last week. Everybody, if you watched the video, if you did the assignment last week, you made your own. And it was a scavenger hunt that we used as a sample assignment in Google Sheets, that program that's used to make a spreadsheet. We learned a little bit about spreadsheets. We learned a little bit about how we have these individual boxes called cells, and they're identified by their row and their column. So, for instance, this cell right here is A2. This cell right here is E18. And we made a scavenger hunt where we had players in each of these columns, and maybe you had two, maybe you had three. We had things that those players wanted to find for their scavenger hunt, and these were things that I gave a couple examples of, and then I said you could add more. So for this one, I added a couple more to go over some things today. That's our part two. And then I had you try something, and if you're in first or second grade, if you didn't have someone to help you, I realized that this would have been difficult, and it's okay if you didn't do this part perfectly, but we have that it will automatically say each player's score at the very end. All right, so this is the sheet that we're going to work with, and we're going to learn about some other features in Google Sheets. Some things that you can do, some things that will make it look better, some things about the way that Google Sheets works. So here's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to learn a little bit about how to edit things that are already in cells. This works a little differently than when you do something in, say, Google Docs or in other programs because of this reason. When you click on a cell, and I'm going to look at this one, A8 right here, and it says things with faces. But what do you notice about that word faces? It cuts off a letter at the end, right? So that's the first thing we notice. Also, if I want to go change what's in there, if I click on the cell and I start typing, watch if I just type ABC, it doesn't add to the end of that cell, it erases what is in it and types what you type over top of it. So I'm going to undo that so that we can go and make an edit that we want to for that cell. So for this one that says things with faces, we're going to change that to say things with a face. That means that we don't need to completely erase what's in here and type over top of it. So how do we do that? Well, you might notice that right up here is a line. And as I go to each cell, you'll see that what's in here changes because that shows us exactly what's in each cell. So if I go back to my A8 things with faces, instead of clicking on the cell and typing, I click on the cell and type. I click on the cell, and then I'm going to go up here and click in this line to edit what's in there instead of typing over it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my backspace key, and instead of things with faces, type things with a face. Okay, and then when I'm all finished, when I've made the edits that I want to, I click out of that cell and it's completed, it's done. Instead of typing over what I typed, it's going to change that inside of the cell by using this line or this box up here where I can edit any text, numbers, formulas, anything else. Okay, so that's one thing that we're going to learn how to do. And in this next part, we want to also see how we can resize these cells. Up here, between the two cells, right, B and C, or between the headers for those columns, and I can put my mouse in between and you see it changes so that the mouse pointer changes to those arrows pointing across from each other. Now if I click one time and hold, I can drag and I can resize that cell. So see how it just made that cell very, very wide. But I don't really want that. That was just to show you that you can click and drag and you can make those cells different sizes on your own. But here's a little trick, an expert level trick, right? What you can do to tell this program, Google Sheets, the spreadsheet program, to make the cell the exact size for the largest thing in that column is what we can do is put our mouse in that same spot in between the two columns, right on the line, and give it a double click and watch what happens. Double click, and it made that whole column exactly the size that it needs to be for that text, or whatever the widest amount of text is in that column. So it resized it perfectly. All right, and I'm going to undo that. And this is where you're going to start to do that. So for this column, column A, that technique is going to work really, really well. I'm going to go and I'm going to click here and get my mouse ready on the line in between A and B and give it a double click. Now remember before, when some of these letters were hidden, right? They were cut off. Now they all show perfectly because it automatically resized that column to exactly what I need. All right, so that's one thing that we can do, and that's going to work very well for column A. So right here where we just did it. Column B, we can also do by putting our mouse right here, giving it that double click. It's going to also work really well for column C. So I'm going to put my mouse right here between C and D and give it double click, and it resized that perfectly. But now I'm going to go to this next column, column D, and there is a problem. By using that double click method, it's not going to do what I want it to. See how in these it shortened them so that it made it just the right amount of space for the widest thing in those cells? Well, I want you to think ahead and think, if I double click right here between column D and E on this line so that I'm resizing column D, and I do that double click, what's going to happen? Is it going to make it like these, where it shortens it so that it makes it a smaller size for just those letters? Well, if you see, what I also have here in column D is I have my title. And remember I said it's going to make it the right size for the widest thing in that column of cells. So when I double click here, it's going to make it way wider so that it's wide enough for this text that says My Scavenger Hunt. It's way wider than these other ones. And that's not what I want to happen. So I'm going to use my undo button. And that's a button we should all know. We've all talked about in every grade. And my undo button is right here. I'm going to click that because that technique is not going to work well. And that's the reason why, because this title is way longer. All right, so I'm going to put my mouse here and I'm going to click and hold, and now I'm going to drag and watch that blue line, and I don't want it to go past where it says player 3. I don't want it to go way wider, but I want it to go right after where it says player 3, so player 3 fits, and all of the numbers line up in that shortened cell, and now it looks like the others in columns B, C, and D, and they all look about the same exact size. All right, so that's a little bit about resizing columns. You can also resize rows, but that gets into another thing that's a little bit tricky called text wrapping. It's something separate that we would have to do, so we're not going to resize any rows today. Now, we want to make this look a little nicer. And not only nicer, it's going to be more interesting and it's going to be easier to read the information that we have. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to go and put border lines, right? And to put border lines, I'm going to first do border lines in this whole group of cells right here that starts with doors in A4 and ends with the number 41 in D12. So what I need to do is put my mouse on this cell A4, click and hold, and drag down to cell D12 to highlight all of that text and the numbers along with it. All right, now that I have those highlighted, I can add in some border lines. And at first, we're just going to add simple black border lines around every one of those cells, all of them. You might say to yourself, and I'm going to look over here at a blank space for a second, you might say, Mr. Henderson, there's already these lines here and I can see them. That's true. But what happens is when you print it out, or if you display it in certain ways, the lines that are already there actually become invisible. If you want lines to be displayed, if you want to see them, if you want them to separate your information, you have to add in border lines. So we have these selected. I haven't done any extra clicks so that they're still selected right here. And I'm going to go look in my toolbar up top for this little icon that looks like a window, right? It's got the 4 boxes, and if I leave my mouse on it for a second, it says borders. So I'm going to give that a click, And now it has all these little icons about what I want my borders to be. And there's a lot of different options. We're going to use a couple of them today, but for this, we are going to add all the borders and we're going to leave it a plain black line for this part. And then in a couple minutes, we're going to show how we can do some different things with our borders as well. So for these borders, I want my plain black lines around every cell. I go to this first icon right here, and if I leave my mouse on it, it says all borders. Give it a click, and you'll see it now showed up where it's separated all of those really easy to see in a really plain way. But let's say that around this whole section here, I wanted a thicker black line. But I don't want it to be on every cell like we just did. I want a thick black line tracing right where I'm going to put my mouse right here around that whole box, and I'm going to leave off the final score box for a minute. So what I want to do this time is I want to select by putting my mouse in A4 and my pointer's right there. I click and hold, and I'm going to drag down this time to D11, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a thicker black border just around the outside of it, not all of these inside lines. So again, I go back up to my border tool, give it a click, but this time I don't use the first icon. I want to go down to this one that shows the outer borders, like a square around the whole outside. That's the icon I'm going to use. Before I do though, I want it to be a little thicker. So I want to go right here where it says border style, and I want to go not from the first one that's checked, but maybe to the third one down. And that's going to give me a thicker line. Then click on my outside border icon right here, and you'll see it adds exactly what I wanted. I wanted a thicker border outside of those boxes. And what I did now is I separated my data. I separated my information or my text and numbers so that it's easier to see these were each of the items and these were the numbers found of each of those items, right? And now I have a few of those border lines separating that information to be a little easier to read. Now let's make it even a little fancier by using some different color border lines for player 1, player 2, and player 3. I want to now select those three boxes right there, those three cells. So I'm going to put my mouse in B3 and drag over to D3. I want to make sure I don't get an extra row there or extra rows down. I only want B3 to D3 selected. And I let go. Now I'm going to go up to my border tool again. This time, I do want to use the all borders icon right here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it so it's a little thicker line again, and it's already there because that's the last one we used. So we want the third one down, check. And now I'm going to use a different border color. You can pick really whichever color you want. I think for mine, what I'm going to like that's going to make it nice and stand out is I'm going to use a purple. I'm going to use this purple right here. Click. And then click on my all borders icon once I selected my color, and you'll see that now in the beginning those players are all outlined in a purplish border. And the very last thing I'm going to do with my border lines is something a little different for the bottom row, row 12, that has the final scores. So see, I made the player name stand out. I have my data as far as the items and the number found all separated and highlighted with those border tools. Now I want my final scores to be highlighted a little differently too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now select these cells A12 to D12 by clicking first and dragging over and then letting go. And now back to that border tool again where we click it, and this time let's make it a different color. For the final score, I'm going to do mine in red. All right, you pick a different color, whatever one you like. And for my border style right here, to set it off a little bit more, I'm going to use this dotted line. And it's going to put a dotted line around it, something to make it stand out, something to separate it so that it's easier to separate those pieces of information in my spreadsheet. So again, I changed the color to a red. I changed the borderline to a dotted line. If you wanted to do something different, all I really want you to see is how this tool works and to choose something that's going to make that final row with the final scores stand out. So now that I have my color and my border line style selected, I'm going to go back to my all borders icon, give it a click, and it's going to put that red dotted line around the final score. All right, and see how we have that all set. Now, since I like things to be like really meticulously good, this is an optional step. You don't have to do this. But what that did is it actually put this dotted red line over top of my bottom border line that separated the items from the final score. That's easy to fix. If you don't want to, if you want to leave it right there and you just want to watch and you want to leave yours the way it is, that's fine. But that's where these other different icons come in to show exactly where we want to put our borders. So if I remember, I had a thick black line underneath of this row that says cars and has the three numbers. So I'm going to click and select. And now, because my red dotted line went over top of it, I'm going to go back to my border tool. I'm going to change my color back to black. I'm going to change my style back to this third thick line. And now, out of all of these, see if you can think to yourself, which one makes sense? If we want just one line here at the bottom, then I'm going to use this icon right here. If I use this, the all borders, it would make all of the lines around what I selected that thick black, and it would look a little different, not what I want. If I used my outer border, it would put a thick black box around this whole row that says cars and then the numbers. But if I just choose this bottom border, it's going to put that thick black line back exactly where I want it. And now it's looking good. I like it. Let's just look at another small thing or two you can do. So we formatted or set up different border lines with our border tool, but we can also shade in cells if we want to. Now, I'm going to do this a certain way, but boys and girls, if you want to do yours differently, if you want to make all different colors and have it look like a rainbow or have different patterns, different styles, you can really pick however you want to shade in your cells. I only really want you to see how it's done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my three player cells up top, B3, C3, D3. I'm going to select those again. And now instead of changing the border outside of them, I want to shade those cells in with a color. So now, instead of my border tool, I'm going to go to this little fill color right next to it. To show you the difference, this A with a line underneath, that's going to change the color of the text. We did that in the title, and we've seen how to change text color before. But now I want to change the color of my cell backgrounds, right? The fill. Right now, every one of them in the entire spreadsheet is white. And what I want to do is change it. So I'm going to pick a color, but I really have to think when I pick my color. I want something that's going to make it so I can still see my text really well. If I wanted to do purple again and I chose this dark purple color like I did for the border lines, watch what happens. It makes it so that that is a little bit hard to read now, right? Because I have the black text, so a darker color text, and a darker fill color, and now it's making those hard to read. So I'm going to undo that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a lighter shade of purple, like maybe this one right here. And now it's shaded in purple, but it's still easy to see the text that says player 1, player 2, and player 3. All right, now this is where we could stop here, right? Because I really just wanted you to see how to add in those fill colors. But if you want to take time, and remember, you can pause the video at any time. You can come back to it. You can keep going. What I could also do is I could decide I want to shade every other one of these rows so that it's easier to see them stand out. So maybe I'll use a light gray on every other one. A little bit darker than that. Let's use this light gray right here on every other one. And now, if I'm trying to read my data, it's easier to see the difference in the lines because they're alternating each one. And boys and girls, again, you can just watch how this is done. You can go do it exactly like I do. You could do it totally different. You could shade in every one of these cells a different color. You could make a rainbow. You could do different patterns if you want. But what I did is I did every other cell a different shade, or I'm sorry, shade of gray, every other row a different shade of gray, so that now those that information stands out and it makes it a little easier to read. That's a common technique in spreadsheets where maybe every other row or every 5 or every 10 rows there's a shaded in row so that it's easier to see the information, especially if you work with spreadsheets like I do that have hundreds and hundreds of rows and you need to read through the data more easily. The last thing I'm going to do, and then we're going to be finished for today, is I'm going to shade in and maybe even edit my text color a little bit for the final scores. So for the final scores, I'm going to select A12 to D12, this final score row right here, and I'm going to go to my shading, and this time I'm going to use a darker color on purpose. I'm going to use a dark red, this red berry right here, right? And I did that and it made my text hard to read. But if you've heard me say this before, and I know my 3rd and 4th graders definitely have, darker colors, a darker colored text and darker color background can make things hard to read, just like a lighter colored text and a lighter colored background, because you usually want opposites. So if I really wanted to use that darker red color, I can use it. But what I should probably do to make this as readable as I can is I should change my text color. So for the last step that I'm going to do to show how you could do this and you could customize your spreadsheet however you want and be able to turn it in, is I'm going to highlight those cells again, A12 to D12, where my text is black, a dark color on a dark fill color, the darker red. But now I'm going to go up to my text color tool, this A with a line under it right here, and I'm going to change it to white. And once I change it to white, look what happened. Now I have a light color text on a dark background and it stands out and it's easy to read. If I tried to write with white and use a white text over here where there's a white cell, it would be invisible. I wouldn't be able to see anything because you want your background colors and your text to usually be kind of opposites in light and dark. All right, so that is now my finished scavenger hunt and a few extra tips, a few extra techniques, or things that are commonly done when people work with spreadsheets like this program, Google Sheets. So I hope you make a nice one, and when you're finished, when you made it however you would like, with whatever color combinations and whatever design and whatever patterns you want, make sure you go back to Google Classroom and click Turn In, and that way I get to see them, see how you did, and know that you finished. All right, everybody, I will see you next week, and I am trying to plan some special fall and Halloween things for next week for computer class, taking a little break from us using Google Docs and Google Classroom and Google Sheets, and do something a little bit fun next week. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, you can email me, you can send me a message in Google Classroom, and I hope you did a great job.